But let's just, like I say, I'm keen to broaden that out. Are you seeing echoes of the Panasonic story and the use cases and the rapid developments? Are you seeing echoes of that across the wider industry?
Yes.
Especially when we start talking about, so talk to us a little bit about that.
So I think, a number of the points that you guys touched on are why, right? So Kris, you said at the beginning, remote service is the topic of 2020 with very good reason, right? But not only is it a really effective way to meet the challenges that these organizations have been facing this year, as Karl said, it's a technology that is has fairly low barrier to entry, right? It can be up and running quite quickly. And have impact pretty fast, which is especially helpful when you're dealing with complexities like COVID has presented. But I do think, Kris, to your point, the most interesting aspect of this story is not only how this technology has helped businesses like Panasonic persist through the pandemic, but how it sets a foundation for broader transformation as we recover and as the business moves forward. And yes, I think that this journey is shared by quite a few others. We've had on the podcast Munters, Alpha Laval. Those are two other companies that quite quickly deployed remote assistance to help business continuity this year, and are also similarly now looking at what does the future hold. So absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting as well because just to look at Munters and Alpha Laval, for example, and then Panasonic, they're all in very, very different spaces, essentially. Alpha Laval very much in that kind of industrial space. Munters, if I remember rightly, I've got this right, Munters is more around that kind of disaster recovery area, if I've got that right.
So Munters does heavy equipment, and so like large heating and cooling units and things like that. But the thing is, I think the reason you see similar adoption across a variety of different industries is that, really this is a technology that holds a lot of value anytime you need to be somewhere that you physically cannot be, or would have value in being able to see and even manipulate something from a distance. And so when you start to think about service across industries and even across roles and functions, you start to really think about all of the different areas of application. So Karl mentioned training, as another opportunity to leverage the technology. Obviously, we're talking about being able to conduct service remotely and achieve resolution, but in the instances where an on-site visit is required, to Karl's point, how do you triage? How do you prepare so that you are effective in that first time fix? So when you start digging in, there's a lot of different applications for how a tool like this can, be incredibly useful.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and I'm going to come back to Karl there because I think that point around triage was something that we touched on as we were going through some of these benefits. But I think that's one of the things that really came out, Karl, as we were speaking, was just how much, I keep going back to this shift in mindset, this break from the status quo. And I think that's a really interesting element of it, how it's not just the point of service delivery, is it? It's much broader than that. It's going from that first initial triage right through to the service delivery and execution. And actually, I would assume then beyond that, like you say, with the training, in terms of the wider impact, I suppose two questions here. In terms of the wider impact, do you see this as essentially it's part of a connected whole? I think that's what I'm taking from what you were saying about some of the internal systems you're putting in. Let me put that up to you.
Yeah, certainly for us, we feel that we're only scratching the surface, as I mentioned, with sort of what we will use this for now and in the future. But I think one thing is that we certainly won't go back to kind of doing things how we did before. I mean, we've seen sort of in situations where we've had to do an intervention, we've been able to provide very quick response. We've sort of looked at this from a training point of view as well. But, Panasonic, we make an awful lot of pieces of equipment. Around 300,000 pieces of equipment are sold just in Europe alone each year. So things such as warranty and how you support customers for warranty, we sell a lot through distributors throughout Europe. And very often what we find is with equipment is that we get a warranty claim. And often what we'll find is we go to site, and again, there may be a delay in that happening because we need to schedule the engineer. There may be a delay because of the work schedule. And actually what we've started to use IFS for is to actually have a sort of eyes on to the equipment before we arrive. And what we've been able to find actually by doing that is that very often it's not a warranty problem. It's perhaps an installation issue, or there's a wire crossed over, something like that. So what we've actually said to our teams now is that we must support the customer, of course, but let's use remote assist first so that we can get the unit operationally quicker without the need to dispatch in again an engineer, which may take time. And of course, there's a cost element for doing that as well. So it's quicker response. It's enabling us to do that in a more effective and efficient way as well. So that's just, again, another aspect that we're looking at to support the customer, but also it helps us. So.
Well, I would imagine with regards to that warranty piece as well, essentially that's doing the customer service as well, because if the engineer is on site and he's sent out and actually it turns out that's not within warranty, it was an installation issue, it's not something that's the responsibility of Panasonic, then there'll be an additional call out fee and all of those escalating fees as well. So I'd imagine there's a multiple tiered benefit for the customer as well.
There is. Certainly for an OEM, it's very difficult to recover those costs once you've dispatched an engineer, because very often it's warranty, it's seen as sort of free of charge because it's a manufacturer's issue. But actually, it's difficult to recover those costs, not just for Panasonic, but I'm sure for other manufacturers. Certainly, in my experience with this, you're on site, you've dispatched an engineer, and then you're saying to the installer or to the customer, "I'm sorry, this is not a warranty issue, and it needs to be paid for." So very often we will do it as a gesture of goodwill. So it's kind of us doing the same thing, but then there's no real costs for us other than maybe a few minutes using the remote assist to aid the customer, which is primarily what we want to do.